As you may or may not know, my family has a ranch in southern Nevada, and this year we have been ranching for 143 years, since 1877. And our cattle have been on that ranch, on that range, since the moment that my forefathers in 1877 rolled into that valley with their wagons and with their horses and with their cattle. And they began to graze that area. They began to establish the waters in that area, and they began to establish the rights that my father still owns today. And in 1890, the state of Nevada actually created a water rights registry that allowed the citizens of Nevada to be able to document their waters. Basically the waters that they were using. They also, and those waters were tied to the grazing rights. And the state of Nevada very clearly back then understood that you can't raise cattle without water, and you can't raise cattle without grass. And so they tied the two together, and they called them livestock watering rights. And that's the way they are today. They're still, if you go to the state registry, in the Nevada State Registry, under the water rights, and you type in Ammon Bundy, you will see that my father owns 11 water rights, and they're titled livestock watering rights. Now he owns other water rights too, because he owns irrigation water rights for the actual farm. But the water rights on the actual land that he grazes that we graze our cattle on are deeded under the title of livestock watering rights. And they actually say that there's, when we prove up on them, we show how many cattle have been watering on those water rights. And so there's, on the deed, it actually says that, you know, this is the area, has a description, just like all other titles, has a description, has a location, has a name, and then it also says how many cattle have been using that water for grazing. Now, what we have and I don't have the time to go and unwind all the actions that have happened with our federal government coming in and basically taking and stealing the private property of the citizens of the states. I mean, we could do it if we had the time, but I think we've had a pretty good background given here in this meeting, and I encourage you to continue to research it to find the history of that. But what we have is, we have here where the federal government has come inside the states and have began to claim the rights of the people. And that's not just the water rights, but in this case, it was, and the grazing rights. Now, I was going to, and I think I'll get a little bit into what I was going to specifically talk about tonight with you. But I felt a need, a desperate need, maybe that's not the right word, but I felt moved to try to explain the issue that we're having when it comes to jurisdiction. And how that is the crux, and how that is what we are losing in this country. Because these jurisdictions are what protects our individual liberties and our individual rights and our ability to even prosper and to live in this country. So if you'll bear with me, I went back into a presentation that I gave to some state legislatures 4 years ago. And trying to help them understand what is happening to us. And I'm going to give you just the first part of it. And then I'll talk about more about, specifically about some of the events that my family has gone through and so forth. As you know, from Nevada, Nevada is called the battle-born state because it became a state in 1864 during the Civil War. And okay, let's see if we got some more technology issue here. And I take responsibility for all of it, I really do. This is part of the reason why I don't use technology. Oh, I can just do that. Okay, good. Okay. So, yeah, maybe turn it down. So, the United States, I won't go into it, but basically was obtained, the area was obtained through the Mexican-American War, through the Treaty of Guadalupe, and basically we won the war. The United States won the war, and we claimed that area. And there was some definitely some impacts or some specifics that are in the Treaty of Guadalupe that are very important, because the people of that area, when the treaty was made, basically the people of the area wanted to become part of the United States. And so the Treaty of Guadalupe actually says that, Guadalupe Hidalgo actually says that once the people of that area become populated enough that they can then apply to become a state, and that the United States has to let them in. You know, and then once they become a state, that they have the right that the right to religion, the right to their property, and other rights will be honored and protected equal to the other states. That's what the treaty actually says. So then we move on here, other way. In 1864, President Lincoln admitted Nevada into the Union. And I just want to kind of look here. It was on the 21st day, and it says, an act to enable the people of Nevada to form a constitution and to form, that's supposed to be formed, and constitution and state government, and for the admission of such state into the Union on equal footing with the original states. And then later on he says, now therefore be it known that I, Abraham Lincoln, President of the United States, in accordance with the duty imposed upon me by the acts of Congress aforesaid, do hereby declare and proclaim that the said state of Nevada is admitted into the Union on equal footing with the original states. So what is a state? And what did President Lincoln mean when he said that Nevada has equal footing with the original states? Now, statehood, this is a dictionary definition, Oxford University, the state of being a recognized independent nation. The transition from late colonialism to political statehood, the status of being a state in the United States. So there are two political jurisdictions that comprise the United States. We have state, and then we have federal. Political jurisdictions of the United States are the various government entities that together form the United States. The senior jurisdiction is the state. The United States government and each state government operate within a system of constitutional jurisdiction. We're going to talk about that. And so, state jurisdiction. States are not subsidiaries created under the federal government. I hope no one in here believes that, because the federal government was not even around until the states got together and created the Constitution, which is a contract between the states, a compact or a charter. Now, how can the federal government be party to the Constitution if it wasn't created until the Constitution made it? So, but my point is that the states are not subsidiaries under the federal government. Rather, political units with plenary jurisdiction over the enumerated powers listed in that state's constitution. So the state has power to, or jurisdiction over whatever the people said the state has in the state jurisdiction, or excuse me, state constitution. Okay, federal jurisdiction within an admitted state is limited by the enumerations listed. That's an error. I adjusted this just a little bit and I didn't have any proofread it. So the enumerations listed in the U.S. Constitution. So basically we have the U.S. Constitution lists the jurisdictional powers that the federal government has, or the general government, or the U.S. government. So you have two you have two jurisdictions. And both jurisdictions are controlled by the people's constitutions. The state constitution controls the state government and gives them jurisdiction. The U.S. Constitution controls the federal government and gives them jurisdiction. And beyond that, let's go here, the primary political unit of the United States is the state. According to numerous decisions of the United States Supreme Court, the 50 individual states and the United States government are separate political jurisdictions. The Constitution maintains the sovereign jurisdiction of each state, and the 10th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution reinforces parallel jurisdiction, declaring that the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited by it to the states are retained by the states respectively or the people. So this amendment is declaring jurisdictional limitations between the people, the states, and the U.S. government. So let's talk about it. So we have jurisdictions, different jurisdictions, and the state's jurisdiction is over the county and the townships. The federal jurisdiction is over the territories and the districts. And each division has specific jurisdictions delegated to them by the people. Now, why would I bring this up in this meeting? We've talked about, Chris talked several times about jurisdiction, you know, in the courts, or they didn't have jurisdiction on the reservation, or they did have jurisdiction on the reservation. They didn't have jurisdiction on this boundary, but they did on this boundary. And that is all based upon this jurisdiction, this constitutional jurisdiction. And so the people are the ones who make the law. They're the ones who establish the law in this country. They did it through the constitutions, the U.S. Constitution and their states' constitutions. And so you have the U.S. Constitution granting the federal government jurisdiction over this, and this area, and this, and this subject matter. And it's very clear. The Constitution enumerates the powers of the general government, the federal government. And beyond that, they can't step beyond that. And the state constitution gives the state jurisdiction over all of these matters. For example, water. We talked about water here. The state has jurisdiction over the waters. The federal government does not have jurisdiction over the waters. And so on and so forth. And those boundaries, those jurisdiction, or constitutional jurisdiction, protect you and protect me. They're designed to protect us, to keep our governments from stepping over the boundaries of what we placed upon them. And they check, the states and the federal government, the counties and the people, they all check each other, check and balance each other. And it's all for the protection of the individual. And that is why it is so important that we understand this. And that's why we're not ranting and raving when we keep saying the Constitution, the Constitution, the Constitution. That's not what we're doing. What we're saying is that you're stepping over the jurisdiction that protects our liberty. That's what you're doing. And you keep doing it more and more and more, to the point where we're being threatened. To the point where you see what you just saw in that video. 213 armed men come down upon a family. And it's all over a jurisdiction. Or they raid a museum. Or they go raid a man's house who is highly regarded in the community. And he kills himself because they're threatening to take his life and livelihood away. Threatening to take his family's livelihood away. Or even his family's liberty away. And they say that if you don't, plea or whatever else it is, that we're going to do this and this and this to you. Well, they should not be there in the first place. Why? Because the constitutional jurisdiction, the jurisdiction that the people gave them, does not go beyond their boundaries, right? And you hear about federal overreach, right? We say that term. What does that mean? That means that they're going beyond their jurisdiction. You hear even the courts. Did you know the first thing the court has to do is establish jurisdiction? That's the very first thing a court has to do. What does that mean? They have to establish whether they have authority to administer the judicial process, whatever it is. And it is important that we understand jurisdiction. Why did I get up here and say what I did earlier in the questions? Because there was a man here who gave a great presentation with a ton of awesome information showing how the management of our forests has been poor and how it's destroyed us, how it's unhealthy and all that. But yet, in my opinion, seem to uphold this infringement upon jurisdiction. That it's okay to allow the federal government to come into our states and to control these lands. And it is not. And all these issues that we are seeing, that my family has experienced, that Chris Cortlander has experienced, that the Hammonds experienced, that Lavoie Finicum and his family have experienced, that the Red family have experienced, and I could go on and on literally probably for a day, maybe more, listing names, is all because of the constitutional jurisdiction boundaries that have been crossed. And that is why we have to understand that. That is why, rather than getting up here and telling you my story, and taking the time to do that, that's why I feel it's so important that I do this. Because the understanding that jurisdiction, meaning a state legislature does not have authority to make laws on everything. They can only make laws on what the state constitution gives them jurisdiction to make laws on. U.S. Congress does not have authority to make laws on everything. They can only make laws on what the U.S. Constitution gives them authority to make laws on. And the bureaucrats can't exercise law on anything that is beyond their constitutional limitations. And that would protect us all. We wouldn't need this meeting. We would not need it if we understood and stood for constitutional jurisdiction. It's what protects us. Now, since I've got your attention here, I'm just going to go quickly through this because I want you to understand a little bit of why these Western lands and how they've been taken over, or at least the justification that the U.S. government is using. Because you have something that's called territories, or we had a whole bunch of territories, right? And we still have some territories today. Guam and Puerto Rico, those are territories, right? Which means they are jurisdictions or areas of land that have been turned into a legal jurisdiction that have not been enabled into the Union as a state. They haven't been, we haven't allowed them to come into the state on an equal footing, meaning they don't have all the rights. Now, according to the Constitution, Article 4, Section 3 of the U.S. Constitution, territories fall under the jurisdiction of the United States government. And it actually says that they can make, the U.S. Congress can make all needful rules and regulations respecting the territories. And actually, that's the way the reservations fall, right? Whether you agree with it, constitutionally or not. Basically, they claim that they own they have unlimited jurisdiction over these areas. Now, but constitutionally, in Article 4.3, it does give the United States government authority to have full jurisdiction over the territories, okay? Now, let me show you here. Now, so we have in the pink the original 13 states, right? Did the U.S. government have jurisdiction over the 13 states? No, they had none. The U.S. government wasn't even created, okay? Now, then once the Constitution was established, then they determined that the territories, right, were going to fall under the jurisdiction of the United States government. And the United States government would have jurisdiction to make all needful rules according to the Constitution, make all needful rules within the territory. So this is the maps of our growth. So now you start to look, the Congress broke up the territories into 4 territories. Now, oh, did you see what just happened there? Ohio just became a state. What happened when Ohio became a state?
No federal jurisdiction.
All of a sudden, the United States government lost jurisdiction over that state. It now became its own sovereign state. And the only jurisdictional powers that they had in it are what is listed in the Constitution, which was very limited. Okay? But look, they also, now the Louisiana Purchase, but look, now a huge more area now became under the jurisdiction of the United States. Because you have the Louisiana Purchase. Who's controlling the orange? The United States government. Who is controlling the pink? The individual, the people within the state. And then it's broken up to counties, and that way a Republican form of government is protected. And what's the purpose of the counties, the states, and the federal government? Is to protect the individual. Because, don't forget, the counties are broken up into what? Well, towns, private property. Who has jurisdiction over private property? The individual does. And it is a jurisdiction. And there's limit. It's all to protect that private property jurisdiction. Okay? So now let's move on here. So you look, they split the Louisiana Territory. They got some more up in the Oregon country. There's some more states that were established. Louisiana. And we have Missouri. Now this is the growth pattern of the United States. It is the way the founders established this, or set the path on for this, for our protection. As we populate the area, it becomes a state. And all the private property and everything falls under personal jurisdiction, under county jurisdiction, state jurisdiction, and federal jurisdiction according to the limitations upon the Constitution. Let's keep going here. So you see, the federal government is losing jurisdiction. And that was intended. That was intentional. Keep going here. Oh, what's the green? Well, that's the Confederacy. That was during the Civil War. And it's interesting this map shows that. So you can see here now Nevada. You see Nevada. See how the bottom part of Nevada is cut off? That was an interesting argument that they didn't want to have in court. They dismissed it before that. But you see here now the U.S. government won the war, or the Union did, however you want to look at that. And you start to see these things. Look at, now the federal government has very little jurisdiction out here in the West. They're losing it by design. Here we go, until we get to here. Now, did the founders see us just ending at 51 states? Or excuse me, yeah, 50 states. I say 51 because that's what I'm getting at. Did they end at 50 states? No. They saw this growth pattern of freedom spreading throughout as much of the world as it possibly could. Because it protects the individual. It is a design that basically becomes a system of protecting individual freedom. Their design was to spread freedom throughout the whole world. And this is the way it was done. It was done by either through acquisition or through even war if necessary, but basically taking an area and it become a U.S. territory, encouraging the disposal and the people to go out and populate that area. And then once it became strong enough and populated enough that it could become an independent people, so a free people, then it would make a state out of it. And now those people are protected under statehood. Their private property is protected. Their individual liberties are protected. And the only job of the federal government is just to protect the states in their freedom. And that was the growth pattern of the founders. And you can see here that without jurisdiction, proper jurisdiction, without proper boundaries, you cannot have individual freedom because of the encroachment of criminals. And without the Constitution defining those boundaries, you can't argue where they're at. You can't argue who's supposed to be here, who does this. Well, so when we're saying, and constantly saying that in Article 1, 817 is a limitation that the federal government has, that the states and the people put on the federal government in owning property inside a state, what we're saying is that that was the protection that the founders put upon the federal government, or for us, upon the federal government, to keep them from coming in and stealing all the land. And that's exactly what is happening. Why? Because we have not understood this jurisdiction. That the federal government does not have jurisdiction to control the land and resources inside a state. And they don't have criminal jurisdiction either. They do not have jurisdiction to be doing what they're doing. Almost all of what they're doing. Because it's very limited. And it causes chaos. And it will continue to cause chaos until we force them back in the box. We don't want to get rid of the federal government. We need them. We don't want to get rid of the state governments. We need them. The counties? No, we don't. We want them to align with the jurisdiction, the limitations that we placed upon them, so that we can be free. So we don't have to live in fear like my father has his entire life almost, of whether the federal government was going to come down upon him and kill his family. My dad was saying this 25 years ago. He was pleading with the state government in record saying, look, I fear for the safety of my family because of this unconstitutional jurisdiction overreached by the federal government. So please understand this. And then finally, let's get into this a little bit. Private jurisdiction. Who gave us jurisdiction over our bodies, our homes, our vehicles, and our other property? God did. He gave us our life. And He gave us our liberty. And He says, I make you free. And that is the ultimate jurisdiction. And that is what all these other jurisdictions are designed to protect. And so when I see, or others, I know it's the same, we see a law that allows somebody to, no matter what it is, if you want to call it law enforcement or whatever, but allows somebody to take and violate a person and strip them down, especially when due process was not offered them, when they have to be stripped over and over and over again. Then you start to, well, wait a minute, you were never given jurisdiction over my body. And I spent almost an entire year in solitary confinement fighting that battle. I would not let them strip me. And so they'd force strip me, and they'd throw me into solitary confinement for months on end. And they would come to with their videos every 2 or 3 times a day. Are you ready to submit to a strip search? And I'm standing naked in front of them. Over and over again. But I constantly was saying, you do not have jurisdiction over my body. And you do not have jurisdiction over my home. You do not have jurisdiction over my vehicles or any other property that I have. That's my jurisdiction. And that's what this country is about. It's about protecting the personal, private jurisdiction. That's why we have elected officials. Their whole point and whole purpose is to protect you and my personal jurisdiction. Amen. My body, my private property. That's what it's about. If you look on a county map, I actually went up, but because of my technological incompetency, I don't think I will try to pull it back up again. But I looked at the map of Montana, okay? And I could see, first of all, the upper part of Montana, there's a line. And above that is everything looks a lot different, right? You don't see the